Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, what life was like on the industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the town of Granby, Mass. So, which locations within Granby are of historical significance?
Granby, Massachusetts is a very historical place, sure. And I would say the most important places are, it's all very old cemeteries, West Street Cemetery and Bachelor Street Cemetery, which are wonderful to look at. And then you can't miss the Granby Commons. The Granby Commons is a local historic district, which is important, which means it cannot be changed by the law. And so you have there preserved a very old congregational church and rectory, and then several homes around that area are what they looked like about 220 years ago. And very few communities can say that their commons is the same as it used to be in the past, and even the side streets from the commons haven't changed much and it hasn't developed much. So you have a very unique situation for this part of the Connecticut River Valley. Only a few other places would have such a thing. So that is exceptionally unique. So today we're going to talk about cemeteries, and then have a question on the brooks, dams, and reservoirs that are around Granby, and then talk about how Granby preserves its history for itself.
And have any cemeteries left an imprint on the town's history?
Yes, I would say both of them have. The North Cemetery on Bachelor Street is a former Baptist cemetery that was started by the Clark family to bury two of its children. The Clark family had a minister, had his father, his name was Joel Clark, and he tried to start up a Baptist church within Granby. It only stayed on the level of having the masses held within a house. It never had its own physical church. And they moved out to Belchtown, and then they moved partially out to Wilbraham. So it didn't stay around long as being a Baptist center. But the cemetery was started on the land of the Clark family. And so North Cemetery, Bachelor Street Cemetery, first two burials are members of the Clark family. And the stone for that first young boy, 8 years old, says right on it, "I've started a new congregation," which you here can see. And that epitaph repeats itself at a cemetery in Belchtown, where the Baptists from Granby went off to. So this very unique epitaph repeats itself, saying that these two stones have started up two different cemeteries. That is incredible. You hardly ever find a gravestone say that it's the first burial of all. So Granby cemeteries are wonderful. Now in the West Street Cemetery, the West Cemetery, there is in there two Native American burials. Also, there's a very old part. If you keep walking past the modern into the Victorian part and then into the old part, you see all the stones lined up very nicely. They're all pointed in the correct direction. The headstone should point towards the west, and they do. So this is not a cemetery that's been disturbed much. Its footstones are gone, but at least its headstones are in the right direction. And also, in general, Granby defines itself by the pride it has in the citizens, and keeping a good cemetery is wonderful, and both cemeteries are kept to a high level.
And quickly, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to sign up for any of his various tours or find out more information, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops on each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 @yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, tell us about the brooks, dams, and reservoirs in the town.
Alright, so you heard it right. It says brooks, dams, and reservoirs. Now, usually you can put those words, sometimes you might say canal. And it turns out that Granby has one canal. It's associated with the Carver Reservoir and the Carver sawmills on it. The Carver family started it up. It's very close to Ludlow, and it uses Stony Brook for its power. It backs up into the reservoir there, the Carver Reservoir, and it connects the upper reservoir to the lower reservoir. And to do that, they made a canal for themselves. So yes, Granby has a canal, the Carver Canal. Right? And the grist mill that these Carver families built, and there were about 4 of them, was along that canal. So it's a power canal. That is incredible for a small town. Alright, there's also the Ingraham Dam and Reservoir, which are found within the Dufresne Park. And there, you might have 2 dams. I'm still working on the research on that. And you might have 2 reservoirs, but they backed it up. There's no canal, but the Ingraham family wanted to use power, so they backed it up behind a dam. Forge Pond does have a canal, a tiny one, that goes to a grist mill for the Cook family, and they back up to Bachelor Brook. So there's 2 canals. One is tiny and one is a little bit longer. There's Aldrich Lake, which was used by the Aldrich family, backing up also Bachelor Brook. And there's not only one large reservoir, there's actually a tiny one further upstream. And then the last brook I know about in Granby doesn't have any of these things. Reservoirs, dams, or canals, called the Money Brook. So that's the situation.
And does Granby preserve their history?
Yes, the Granby Historical Society is very popular, and they maintain their house that they've been donated and their barn that they use, and they keep up a great place. And I hope you go to Granby and see that. It preserves other things. I told you about the local historic district at the Granby Commons. That is not very common. Local historic districts are quite rare around West Massachusetts. That means that the Granby government got together and said, we want to have this. And they voted in, and the amount of people that wanted it over those that did not want it was greater. And that's rare. You can go through a lot of communities and not find local historic districts, but Granby has one. Now, it doesn't have a CPA, or Community Preservation Act, but there is a movement on this year, 2024, where an Eagle Scout project from a Boy Scout in Granby, he's making many of the gravestones in the West Street Cemetery into great shape, fixing those that are fallen over, fixing those that are shifted around and lean too much, and also fixed around them so they have a more stable area, which is wonderful. And a lot of the old houses, too, have been maintained. I would bet there's about 20 homes in Granby older than about 1820, including one which is a salt box. So you can visit Granby and see all these wonderful things.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts and more on his website, as well